Okay, so this should be dry enough now. All I'm gonna do is lightly sand, just to take off mostly around the edges. I don't want to do too much because after I stencil, I am going to sand the stencil off a little bit too to distress it. And I just want the black to show through the beige. I'm just lightly hitting it. Just in spots, not the whole thing. Some spots more than others. I don't even know what grit this is. It's 180 grit, in case you're curious. I find that you can use any though. You just have to use less pressure if it's a rougher paper. And this paint didn't leave a light shine. I'm going to try to. This also helps for peeling of the paint when you lift your stencil, especially if you're using a Cricut stencil so it's sticky. If you're using a regular stencil, obviously it won't stick to it, but I find if I sand off some, I have less lifting when I lift the stencil off. It's still a little tacky. Should be fine though. So I'm just lightly hitting it. And you can see where the black is showing through on the edges. And I do a lot more in the corners than I do in this corner down here. Okay, Rose. In this corner, you can see the wood and then the black and then the beige. I just think it gives it a more primitive, rustic feel when you sand it. And in some spots I will sand down to the wood, and in others I'll just leave the black. Okay, I think that's good because I am, like I said, gonna re-sand except for this painter after I do the stencil because I like to distress the stencil also. Hi. And I also find if you take off too much, you can always distress it with a dry brush of black over the top if you need to. I'm usually pretty cautious about how much I take off. Okay, I think that's going to be good. And then I keep going. All right, I'm stopping before I go too far. Okay, I'm just going to grab the stencil, which is right behind me. I just did, this is going in my spare bedroom. So I just did a goodnight stencil, and I don't use regular vinyl. I just use shelf paper that I get at Walmart. I think it's Duck brand. It's just way cheaper than using vinyl. I do use regular transfer tape though. I think it's by Frisco. I get that on Amazon. It comes in a big roll, and I love it. It's my favorite transfer tape. Now for this, my board was wider than I could cut on my Cricut. So I'm just going to eyeball. I need to stand up. Make sure I leave same amount of space on each end. Measure it up as best I can. That's about, I think that's good. Just flatten it out. Now I don't like to push it down too hard. I'm just very careful when I paint, and then I won't get any bleed. Just lift off the transfer tape. This one, I did not unsticky very well. Usually I will put it on my shirt, the transfer tape, to make it a little less sticky. I forgot. So we're not having any issues, it doesn't look like, with peeling the tape. Looks like it's going to be fine. If you start to get a little lifting, just pause and rub it down lightly. I also find I just got a wrinkle there, but I can get that right out. Does not want to stick there. Okay, there we go. And just go slow, a little bit at a time. Sometimes I will cut this piece off if it gets too bulky. And I just go really slow. You have to have patience so that you don't mess up your stencil. And when I get to like the end, I always start from the bottom. Oh, I have two pieces of transfer tape here. I forgot. That's okay. It's going to come up as one. There. Almost there. Okay, a little wrinkly here. I'll fix that. I know if you push it down really hard, you won't get too much lifting like I'm getting, but I find if I haven't let the paint dry enough and I stick my stencil down too firmly, it will lift the paint. Again, it's all about patience and letting your paint dry enough. Push this one down really good. So I'm getting quite a lift here. Okay, that's better. There we go. Looking for my scissors. There they are right in front of me. I'm just going to trim off, make this transfer tape shorter so I don't have as much to deal with here. All right, now I did get a little bit of lifting, so I'm going to go back and fix that a little bit at a time. And it's very easy to do. You just have to lift it a little bit, get it flat. My D is lifted. Okay. There. Just try not to get any big creases that the paint will go under. Okay, that's good. Especially with this rough wood. All I'm gonna do now is rub around the edges. I'm not gonna press down where I don't need to on the stencil. I'm just gonna go around the letters. Especially since this wood is so rough and bumpy that I wanna get a good seal just around my letters. I'm not too worried about like rubbing in here, but just around the letters. And I'll just do it with my finger. But I find if you really take just the smallest amount of paint when you're doing your stencil, it does take a little bit more time. But I usually don't get any bleed underneath. Okay. And I think, I don't know if I want to go, we're going to go cranberry, sure. I don't really have a cranberry, so I'm going to go ahead, mix a bunch of different reds until I get a color that I like. I do have a paper towel to wipe off. I have a Tuscan Red by Apple Barrel, which I think is a little too, that's more of a barn red, even though I have a barn red. I'm just gonna mix a couple of these together until I get the color that I like. And what is this one? That's barn also. Not sure I like that. Barn red is more of a pinky red. All right, let's add more Tuscan, see what happens. Okay. I'm gonna actually mix it with what I'm gonna put the paint on with. Yeah, that's pretty. And then just get it almost all off my pouncer. Get it all off. I'm actually gonna get most of it off onto the paper towel. And then we are just going to lightly, very lightly, because I do have some spots where I can tell I might get bleed because of the roughness of the wood. So I'm just gonna go really slow and really light and do a couple coats. Just double check before I start. Okay, so again, I'm just gonna take, let's see if I can turn it this way. It's still, and just lightly pounce up and down. Yeah, this is gonna take a while. I have to put it flat, but you'll be able to see. Just lightly. And I'm just going up and down, up and down. And again, this is probably going to take more than one coat. Definitely more than one coat. But because it is so rough, I really have to take my time on this so I don't get bleed underneath the stencil. And you only want to, you don't want to pounce. You just want to lightly touch the wood. Because if you push too hard, the paint will be forced underneath. You don't want that to happen. It does happen occasionally. You can usually go in with a tiny paintbrush, sometimes even the end of a safety pin, to touch up the edges. But hopefully today that will not be an issue. Again, just very lightly. but I don't coat the wood with, some people say if you put a layer of Mod Podge, you won't get bleed. I just find that if you really just go light and almost a dry sponge, you really won't have bleed. It's all in the pressure that you put onto the wood piece with your stencil brush, I don't use the stencil brush anymore, I used to. I love these little sponge things, pouncers I think they call them. I found that these work the best for me. And just a light sparing amount of paint. I even dab off. Sorry, my dog thought he was eating something. Sparing amount of paint on it, light pressure is the best way to go, and then you won't have bleed. And if you do, you can touch up the edges. It's not fun, but it is fixable, so don't be scrapping something. But you should get very minimal bleed with doing it this way. And I usually try to let those two dry, and I'll go on and then I'll come back to them if I need to. So just very lightly around. Just playing crazies. That is Mason the Frenchton. Is very vocal when he plays. So in some of these, I don't know if you can see, like right here, there's an indent right under there, so I'm not going to force the paint into that. I'm just gonna let it go. And I'm just rubbing down where I can see the stencil sticking up in some spots. That D right there. There's a big indent at the top of this letter. I just don't want any bleed. But if I do get bleed, I'll be able to show you how I fix it. Just take your time. Oh, too much paint. Did not dab enough on that one. Okay, that's better. You can even go like in the middle of a letter just to see how much paint you actually have. Sometimes I'll do that. I'll stamp in the middle like of the D, so I can double check before I commit to actually stenciling on the letter. But I find that this way is what works best for me. I know there's a lot of different ways that people will do a stencil. Again, very rarely do I get bleed anymore since I've started doing it this way. Unless my stencil's not sticking. Right there, it's not. But this is also a very, very rough piece of wood. But I really like the look of it. And you can use a piece of wood from a palette. Very rarely, once in a while I'll go and buy a board if I'm making like a big outdoor sign. But I always try to find just scrap pieces that I think are cool looking old, some of the scrap wood. We found a company that builds sheds near us, and they get rid of their scrap for free. So I'll go and I'll pick up some for firewood outside. I won't go, my husband will. We will go. But some of the pieces that they have are pretty good size. So I'm like, I'm always seeing something. I actually have a pile in our shed that I told my husband not to burn because those are for me. But I mean, you can always find pallet, or you can go and buy the wood. And if it looks too new, you just bang it, beat it up. There's lots of videos on doing that too, how to distress wood to make it look older. Or you can just leave it nice and smooth. I have a lot of signs that are not as rough as this one, and I like those too. It just depends. Oh, that was a lot of paint. So keep a paper towel handy. If you find that you've put too much paint, just wipe it off onto your paper towel. Oh yeah, see. Okay. Light. We are almost done. And then when this dries, I will show you how I distress it even further. Because now that the board looks old, you don't want your writing to look new. Just like it all to look old and weathered and like it's been outside or hanging around the house for a while. Okay, 2 more letters, and this T is lifting. I find that if I sand more than I did, this doesn't happen, the lifting. But it's almost like this one had, it's a satin, like a shine to it, and it's not sticking well where it's shiny, where I didn't sand enough, but it will be okay. Almost there. And again, I'm going to have a lot of letters that the wood shows through, the black shows through, the tan shows through, just because of the roughness of this board. Hopefully, in the end, it comes out how I can see it in my head. Sometimes that doesn't happen. But you never know until you lift the stencil what it's gonna turn out like. And again, just very, very light. If you have to go over it 3 or 4 times to get the color you desire, you know, it's better than having to fix a bleed. And as it dries, you can see, it's kind of hard for you to see, but I can see where I may need to hit it again. This bottom of this D is a little lighter. And my G. Okay, finish the last letter, and we'll lift off the stencil. Again, can't say it enough. Very light, minimal amount of paint. Just keep going. Usually do like a circular motion, and if you just like this, I find it works really well. And stenciling is I was very intimidated the first time I tried it. It does take a little bit of practice, so practice on a piece of paper. I used to get just a piece of construction paper, a regular printed paper, and put my stencil on top, not a Cricut stencil because they're sticky, but regular stencils. And I would just practice until I got the right colors, the right vibrancy of the colors that I chose, until it looked good, and then I would try to recreate my practice onto something real. Okay, I'm just gonna alright, I think we're ready. I might want to hit that spot one more time. And right here. Okay, big reveal. Hopefully this came out good. Now I don't usually wait for my paint to dry before lifting off the stencil because you can end up lifting some of what you painted if it gets too dry. So I usually do it when it's pretty wet. Let's see. I'm just peeling off the pieces that ripped. I don't have my Cricut tools over here. Oh, there we go. Just have to peel my O's and my D. Okay. So let me see if Doctor says good night. It's going in again, the spare bedroom. Okay, we're gonna let this dry for a second, and then I'm going to show you how I sand the actual stencil to make it look a little older. Okay. So I'm just gonna go in to get a little more of the tan off. I'm not gonna sand the stencil yet, just around it. Now I have used an actual sander while doing this. Just have to be really careful you don't go too far. So a little bit at a time. Thinking I should have done the letters black. I'm not sure I like this color that I chose. But again, not doing the stencil yet, it's too wet. I'm just doing it around it. And it will go right over the whole top of the board in a minute, as soon as it's drying. Now I am pushing kind of hard now because I'm almost done. And that's how I get the rustic look. So here's this piece before. I just want to hit it, not in the same, I'm not going to sand the whole thing, different levels to make it look, I can explain that right. actually going to cut this sandpaper. It's a little too bulky. Just one little piece. Get my hand in there. Okay, that's better. And just go slow so you don't take too much, because you can always take more, but you can't really put it back if you've gone too far. So I usually just will step back and look at it to make sure I don't go overboard. Okay, now we're going to sand the actual stencil. I think it's dry enough. And this I'm going to do really light because I just want some distressing, just to make it look not as bright and new. And in some spots I'll go a little heavier than others. You don't want it to all look the same. Just enough to make it look a little worn. See if you can tell the difference. I'll try to get a close up at the end. But just lightly take off some of the brightness of it. No, I don't always do this, especially if it's like an outdoor porch sign. Sometimes I'll weather it, sometimes I'll just leave it. Slightly. Okay, I think that's good for the stencil. And I'm going to hit some of this tan a little bit more. It's still kind of shiny. I don't know what made it shiny. We'll see. Okay, that's better. And now I'm just pressing really hard along the edge. I just want some of this black to show through. So there you have it. A rustic primitive sign. I'm done. Some of these corners a little bit more. There, that's good. So you can get up close. So here I have some of the wood showing through, some of the black, and so you can see how I sanded the letters down. Just a little bit so that the beige shows through in some of the black. In the edges. So there it is, how to make a primitive sign. And you can sand as much as you want. If you find this isn't enough, you can certainly bring some of the black up with a dry brush and go over it. I have one. Let's see if I can show you that I did that on. I can explain. Sorry about my close-up there. So this one, I actually brought the black in with a dry brush, sorry, over the top, because I hadn't sanded it enough. So you can do that also. But that's it. That's how I make my primitive signs. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and learned something. How you can make your signs for your house relatively cheap, scrap wood. You can certainly buy your stencil. If you have a Cricut, you can make your stencil. But that's how I get the rustic look. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.